I would like to show my good feeling to be back here at the school. And I see the students around, but I see my colleagues around, and I see the dean. So, yeah. And thank you very much, Ram, for this very personal statement about myself. I should send it to my dean and to the rector in Bielefeld. Maybe a little bit will be paid back. Huh? So thank you very much for this. And I come years after years with a task. We had a debate about it, I don't know when, years ago. What is the reason to come here? To discuss, to learn. Research is a little bit, practical research, a little bit complicated because the money is then coming up and our institutions don't pay for the real capitalistic society. Huh? And the other way around, sometimes you have not money enough to travel around the world and do your research there in combination. Research is always very expensive. But we have learned to discuss research theoretically. And I think with both sides we have done advantages in that way, and I'm very proud about the debate, which is debates which are coming up in the next days, and so on. So I decided in discussing, after discussing with you, always to try to give you an impression about European social work. What happened at with the British say now we were losing them, that's not too bad because they call out people from the continent. But we are not from the continent, we are Europeans. So that is the point. But I think there's a more or less difference. There are differences in the definition of social work, not in this international definition. They are so abstract they can't be wrong. But if you go deeper into details, the nations have another feeling, because social work in itself is always an ideological approach, a very strong normative approach, and besides that, with different intensity, also research in itself. But there are different portions which we can discuss. This time I would like to report about a changing social policy, at least in the West European countries. The other countries still working to come up a little bit, but that is the point. And especially also in Germany, you know, Germany had, besides the Scandinavian countries, had a very strong welfare system, and the founding situation was with Bismarck and all the things, so historical things. But now there's a dramatic change. I will come back in a moment to that, with a big impact on the definition of social work. That is the point. We are doing our research now on that together with other colleagues, at least from Europe. And I think we have to take into mind that social work is never independent. Social work is belonging to social policy, and later then when we're going on to welfare, the welfare state or the welfare ideology. And that is the steering ideas you have to find always in this combination. Till now, it was, we had a traditional welfare system. Critics called it the pouring down system. When something happened in your life, you can ask for, by law, for money from the state. Doesn't matter what happened really, if you have the fact, the money came down. The new thing, the social investment, that is old-fashioned way, costs money. It was always behind this changing ideas. But behind that is the idea, let's make a social investment program. Let's start as early as possible, and then we get at the end the biggest amount of money as payback. For instance, children. Esping Anders, you know the name of this guy. He had it in mind when he started, I think now should 20 years or around about. But now the official program and also the European Union took it over, because the idea beyond this or behind this social investment is bringing people back to work or prepare them to the economic system, not more. So that is the point. And therefore, all this discretion ideas or the discretion to try to make discretion in unsafety, in Unsicherheit. Was heißt noch Unsicherheit? Doch.
Insecurity.
Huh?
Insecurity.
Yeah. To make this discretion in insecurity, which was the main point for really good educated social worker is not there anymore. We have now a managerial outcome which is blunt, following the political agenda and not something anymore. I will now, because it was now, you got all, I think you should got abstract, is it? You are informed about the abstract? No. I'm very sorry, I did a very good abstract. And there are in a few lines all things coming together. So I don't want to repeat it because I have another agenda here. Then I can stop it. I don't want to stop. So now we go a little bit in the deeper construction of the things. Private and public life inside democratic capitalistic societies cannot be imagined without organized welfare anymore. Welfare has become a vital feature of the macrostructures of modern living, the guarantor of individual livelihood and collective capacity for action, social participation, and a social cohesion. At least that are the story which is always behind welfare. It is not always a reality, but it is the aim. Yet welfare arrangements are subject to constant change, as I just tried to make clear. Originally set up industrial societies, current welfare states are facing upheavals on different fronts. If you go back to your own welfare system, you can see that immediately, how the welfare has gone, more or less. Gone. Today was a very interesting note in this popular news paper, which you never read, but I do that. It is in an English which I can go fluently through. What is it? US Today. And there was a note that now this illness, this health insurance is coming up again. So I read it, I didn't really believe it, because it said, now we should make a step forward. All people in the US should get a health insurance safety. All people. That is much more as in German can discuss, because in German we have this always this a clash between private insurance and the other one. Until now it is not to overcome. You see, for instance, the university people are private, so we are well off. And I was astonished about this kind of indicator, because health insurance is a kind of welfare program in itself. And that's only by the way, but other things I don't want now to bring here to the forefront, you know that. Welfare states in Europe are implementing new modes of welfare production with significant consequences for the life of those who need to rely on public health and support to adapt to the new challenges. The scopes and scales of these reforms, as well as their societal implication, may vary in accordance with institutional pathway and general political and economic constellation. However, a fundamental change in welfare production and leading to it is observable, and leading to a distinctly new phase of welfare states and dramatic implication for the beneficiaries. There we have to be very careful, because the story is that all people will get something out of this new approach, but it is not. I will come later to this point. So all this new changing is defined as social investment state. Something will be given and something should be come out. So if you give $1, that is always the example with a young child. When it is in old age people, then you got a lot of money back, because the people will pay it back by them. They have not to be supported. That is the point in this thing. So that's the welfare economists who are doing it. It is a simple counting process. So the rise of the welfare state related. Moment. I have the bigger thing that I should go. Now, yeah. So, wait a moment. I have 25 minutes. So, okay. The rise of the welfare state, as I call it here, seems to be related to what has been presented as a sophisticated answer to the neoliberal critics and the traditional welfare settlement. They call it, in the literature, it's called the social investment turn. So we give something, but we would like to get more out. That is an economic rule behind it. Until now it hasn't to be done, it has not been done with a social investment, but or with a social welfare, but now they start. And later on, or can bring it, we have a social investment situation with social investment bonds. So that people now, because you are living, I am living in a rich country, we don't know where the money should go. So we know it, but officially, no. Now the rich people try to find a new sphere where they can get something wie hat er Zinsen in that? Zinsen? Is it? Huh?
Interest.
Interest is not so correct, that's noch ein anderes Wort, aber it's good. Interest. So we know what happened. Huh? So, and they would like to get money, and they would get 7% back. So, yeah. So, and think about this. It is done with people and in an area which has other aims to follow, but not to make the rich people richer. So that is now a climax in our discussion. In Germany, it's coming up just now. And but all people who the cities and so, oh, why not? And so, because they don't think about what is behind. They think we have a kind of empty situation in this and this things which should be done. Now we ask these people to come in and they get the money back. It's a complicated process, but only to tell you where the train is reaching to. That is not the things which I learned when I became a social worker. There we had the norms always around and we didn't think much about it. Then the Christian ideology came beside that, so we are always thought we are doing good things. So later on we learned another, and 200 years of Marx is now here, always around. I don't know here in the US, but in Europe it's coming, because it is right if you read the classifying of the society, which is still there, not in the name that the worker and so on, but the split of the society is now so immense also in Germany that there is an open debate also from the conservative side to call it Raubtierkapitalismus. Was ist der Raubtier? 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 Was? Yeah? So they call it, I didn't get it properly, XX capitalism. Huh? And it is in the normal newspaper it's coming up. So it is not a blaming situation to tell people we are living in a capitalist society. But the reflection about it is growing now a little bit. It's growing. Huh? So back to the social investment. I skip it here. Moment. So anymore. Proponents of the social investment are convinced that the old solution and the providing institutions are either fundamentally ineffective, perhaps because the new social problems could not be solved by just improving the available resources of those in need anymore as the traditional welfare regimes did. And or because traditional ways of welfare are seen as, for example, in the case traditional social, in the case of the traditional social services, too rigid, too patronizing, and too paternalistic. That is the blaming, the blaming definition to the old welfare state. Patronizing means we are the expert, you are not much. Huh? And then the other is paternalistic. I know what to do. I'm working as a kind of father role, and the other have to follow. So that is blaming. I not always agree with it, but that is the all-over debate which is coming up. According to this discourse, I now roughly get for the introduction of my second part. According to these discourses, I want to sketch out some important developments. Certainly one of the most important renewal is the emphasis of capacitating. That is the other term, capacitating for the economic line. This focus implies a significant recalibration of the cognitive and normative orientation about welfare policy should achieve. The new currency of justice, which is the main topic in welfare production, is claimed to be the empowerment of individuals to achieve active social participation as well as self-reliance and flourishing personal life conducts, instead of passive transfer, the old approach, to improve life conditions. People should be capacitating to tackle their challenges on their own. So you are self-responsible. Yeah, you get some chances at the beginning, maybe in the kind of education or this kind of things which is coming up for all people, but then you have to take care about yourself. And you know this 5 years welfare situation here in Pennsylvania with your lovely President Clinton. He did a really press on this welfare system, but he is a hero still. I don't know why. Coming along with these new ideas, constant and lifelong learning becomes a central notion in welfare too. So always be prepared to be integrated into the working process. That is the point. So, further security. Yeah. Further security can respectively should not only be achieved through protection. against market failure and compensation payment anymore, the old one. Much more security has come to mean the capacity to confront challenges and adapt via lifelong learning, to acquire new or update old skills, as well as via early childhood learning. Therefore, the increasing of the human capital of each citizen became the most important objective of the welfare ideology. You see, I define between human capital and human development. Maybe later here, expert in this room, and they can give you later also. So, also, now let me hear. Unlike traditional social security based on compensation, that was the old situation, compensation for the failure of the system. That is very important. Compensation and mitigation through income support here and now, after social misfortune has struck. Social investment policy aims at preparing rather than repairing. Repairing is in the moment, preparing is in some years. And when you then fail your own way, you have to tackle yourself. And if you go here through the streets, so. Or you see wanted people who are for hours or hours, 3 different occasions, they are working in Germany, starting the same now. It's not only from here, but we learned. That is the point. That is the point. Social here, preparing rather than repairing, focusing on the roots and social problem. A claim that might be questionable, and emphasizing prevention rather than cure. That is the other thing. So I have the feeling, luckily my watch is there. I go now. I go now to the professional. I think the first thing is more or less clear. So now, what does it mean now when we bring it together with the social work agenda for the future, and what are the really fighting points to become a really well-educated social worker? The welfare service claims to tackle the new challenges and welfare and societies more effective than traditional or neoliberal approaches by capacitating its citizenry with the skills and human capital they need to maintain their subsistence, relying on the market. That's the other point, market. A young colleague later will come to this topic, I'm sure. But the official welfare agencies in Germany are now definitely on the way to raise their market position. Social services, with their individualized, hands-on approach, became the means of choice to reach those in need and to find an individual way to bounce people back onto the labor market if for one reason or another they fall out of it. While advocates of a more service-based welfare system highlight the role of social services as key instrument of the social investment strategy, enhancing the performance of public welfare profession and facilitating their intended transition from income security to livelihood security. With this social investment means a real harsh agenda to bring the people, to prepare the people for the position in a productive life. So that's one. Social work, as we just heard before, in the traditional, no, I don't think in a very competent way, really has to have to be trained with discretion and it's a competence for one thing which other profession can't do. As far as the neighbor or other profession can do that, I'm not keen to do my work there. I have to have another point of view when I really work as a profession, And social work has now, enforced by a very strong, growing managerialistic way, to follow this program and to try to bring this program to the people, and not think, okay, we have another point of view in this case of a subject that's not on the agenda anymore. So that is the point. And we have now coming up with this digitalization. The social worker get mad by this because of the social work agencies, not the social work, the agencies. They try to grab it, the next step in modernity. And they had this idea that their modernity is bringing advantage to them, because the split between this kind of professional working, in the way I defined it here, and the agencies, the split is growing. They are growing because social workers are not asking to do their own way. They are following that to bring in the policy of the state. In that way I try to make a little bit clear. No, but there's one thing. I think you have in mind the Bea Cantillon. You remember we had a colloquium. Bea Cantillon. Mark Stern, you know her? Yeah. So, what was it? She was doing an empirical research. Is it really for all people a chance to start and to come to an advantage in their life? And she said, no. She did an empirical research. She said, the really people below a certain level of education are not really able to take this program as an advantage for them. It is a typical middle class program and go on, because they are able to follow the schools and can do all the other things. And we had a slogan now, it was proven in Canada and came over to Northern Westphalia, so this lovely country or state where I'm living. No child left, leave no child behind. Ne? Yeah. And then Bertelsmann, a conservative setting up, but not a friend of progressive work, really, sometimes yes. They did a big study, and they came in an empirical study to the end. It was not working. And it was together here with Bea Cantillon, a Belgian colleague, because it's clear people who don't have any chance out of their family and are poor and are not able to follow this normally norms in the school and all the things. How can they earn something for themselves by this kind of social investment? They can't. They are not really prepared for this. It is the discussion. We have to go deep into details, and we have this problem later, maybe with the migration process now, and these people should be integrated. In which way it has to be done, it is a very, very complicated process. So, what is missing till now is we do that. What is missing till now are analytical conceptions that allow to distinguish between the agency and the freedom of person not to take up services and the problematic situation in which persons are hindering in accessing the supporting they would have a reason to value. So a complicated thing for research is coming up, and we will do not alone to do our best. Social services are framed by organizational and managerialistic requirements which are embedded in a concept of action which is oriented on efficiency. This reduces the possibility of a professional, competence-oriented discretion of the frontline workers to capture the individual and subjective dimension of the suffering of the welfare beneficiaries from the very beginning. Structural analysis, which has been the starting point of coping with life crisis for progressive social services, will be replaced by short-term individualized solutions in which the subject, its belief and its action are playing a major role. Street-level bureaucrats are losing the term here from Lipsky, ne? Yeah. We had him once in Bielefeld. He was an interesting colleague. But it was a term which is worldwide used without critical thinking about that, because he was an advantage thinker, and that way because when we see it from today, it is not my term. I never would like to call professions on that way. But street-level bureaucrats are losing their independent competence of action. That was the point. As a perforce, but also necessary, become amplifier of a social policy agenda which relies on social services but limits the possibility of an autonomous professional identity at the same time. So that is the core of my talk here. This pressure, this pressure will be amplified by the opening of welfare measures for private capital. No, I can skip it because I told you that. That is here a bisschen. So, the strengthening of the subject through a widening of the people's scope and the increasing of their capabilities for a self-determined life is locked in by the imperatives of operationalizing, measuring and contractual agreements. Further, the designing of social services might not be motivated by a better and more creative fit to the demands of welfare citizens, but by entrepreneurial consideration. Therefore, the agenda setting of welfare policies is in danger of not being based on political deliberation, but the interest of profit of certain actors. Welfare measures could be provided not by the necessity, but by their financial potential. Again, a welfare architecture which is based on such premises is risking its democratic and universal to bring up. I would like now to sum it up. So, first, when we do this kind of social work I have in mind, we also have to discussing the calibration or recalibration. That means the relation between the beneficiaries and the state. What kind of role of citizen is the state defining them when this social policy agenda is shifting now to the shifting to the marketization? Huh? That is the point. And why are social workers so willing to follow? Why? No reason for that. So it can. So that is that point. And the dealing with the consequences and effects of paid employment, but becomes this capacitating is reinterpreted as investment in personal skills. This choice of terminology and interpretation of social intervention contains and economic imperialism. That's not from me, that is a colleague who has done this. And establish a new view to unemployment, poverty, homelessness, and disability. Because social policy denies the claim to strive at autonomous targets, aiming for the correction of these facts, and is according to the sense of new steering models seen as productive itself. Mark, I remember it was a sunny afternoon. 5 seconds. It was a sunny afternoon for the International House, and a colleague from Norway, sorry. From Norway came, Lodemo, ne? Lodemo, huh? Yeah. And he was, in my opinion, fanatic on the wrong idea. Yeah, yeah, because they thought, okay, we have to bring them in any way to the productive line again. And we have that in Germany the same. When you are now out of work, you will get some money. Oh, a little bit. But when you are not really coming up in a proper way to help yourself, the state will enforce you to do that. And when you don't do that, they will always further reduce the money to a certain bottom line. So that is one thing in this. And social work, big debate, but always from the critical portion of the social worker. Mostly social workers don't think about and find enough reason to legitimize the system in a certain way. Very often the political bigger debate is more progressive also in the critique as the social workers themselves. And that is the reason why I'm always thinking social work is a political profession. When it doesn't define itself in that way, then it doesn't work much, because we have always to see the individuum and you have to see the structure. My famous example is a family with a poor family, and all this, at least the men there, they are poor, they are unemployed and poor. And what should the social worker do? The social worker can try now to take one person for another and say, now we analyze your personal problem. I think, thank you very much. Yeah, it is done. It's done. Because the other way is, you should know about how is the poverty situation came into your country. And I now, what is it, poor, Bowles and Gintis, they had this book, The Undeserved, yeah, ne? So you know about that, So don't apologize, You know about that, but this knowledge has gone, and we are now shifting. We and you, we are shifting to the other side, That is the point. And furthermore, now I come to an end. Promise, conclusion. No, I make the conclusion of the conclusion. Oh man, it was fine done, but yeah. So, that is the things. Another 2 pages, but I do it fast. Service-based welfare needs reorientation. That is the point. I would like to go further, but not now. What is at stake in this approach to what is at stake in this approach to welfare? This new one is not just a correct form of action, but participation appropriate to the respective historical situation in chances and education, and making choices that are available and can be realized, taking into account the addressees' lifestyles and capabilities. This does not at all exclude a human capital premise. We have to have it. Without does it no work. But it certainly leads, as a matter of principle, to an inalienable development of agency-related forms of possibilities. In other words, to human capital, to human development beyond human capital. It is only through the restitution of or demand for this correspondence between subject and a social structure that addressees can recognize a way of expanding their scope of action. When giving, that is, a more or less equal access to those means that are necessary for human beings to take decision in matters that importantly affect their life. This refers not only to the self-determination of people to make decisions about their lives as free and independent person, but also their abilities and capacities to co-determine collective decision that concerns their life as members of a more comprehensive community where they have the same rights as others. So, this is only one way to develop an open democratic society, while the implementation of social service under the exclusive premise of the human capital approach is not only a misinterpretation of the basis of their professional approach, but also a reductive view to the dire social consequences of further exclusion, division, and social downgrading. The necessary research question developed out of this fact that social investment creates a huge impact for the social work itself in the academic discussion as well as in politics and in the practical field. In Bielefeld we try to find some research question out of this complicated coming together of the different positions which now happen in the field. But as far as I have something to do, I would like to strengthen the professionalizing of the social work as the only chance we have. We can work as a manager, okay, but with a background of a critical profession. If we don't do that, we are lost, and we are losing the status to be a reflexive professional. And I think that is the task at least we try to follow, and as far as I know here, the school, I have the feeling that we coming together very fast when we go deeper into the detail which happen here and happen there. And you are a strong school, and therefore I would appreciate it very much when now here kind of push is coming, and we will see what happens now when Holger is now going on with the problem here. It is also your problem, né? You know it very much. Huh? This is not, that is in between. So thank you very much, and I apologize for my now not really proper English, because I had more pages in a proper reading situation, but I cut it for 25 or 30 minutes. I will pay it back later in another situation. And therefore, thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and especially for the very kind invitation here. It's great to be at Penn and in Philadelphia. It's my first time in Philadelphia, and I enjoy it a lot. It's also great to see some familiar faces in the audience, and it is a real honor to share the stage with Hans-Uwe. We've never worked together in Germany, you must know, but my thinking would not be possible without the work that he and his colleagues have done in Bielefeld. So I'm not going to quote him every time I think that would be necessary, but that is said before. So my research, and it was already mentioned, I was interested basically in what it means to live in poverty in one of the richest societies in the world, in Germany, and what it means to use a food bank there, what it means for service users of food banks, for their self-concepts, for their self-relationship, and what it means for them to be identified as being poor and identify themselves as being poor. And I understood these narrative biographical interviews as narrative constructions of themselves, yeah? And try to analyze what does this mean to them. And what I found really is stigmatization and emotions of shame. And I would say that the emotion of shame, when we look at poverty, is a really important one, because it is a social emotion. It's not an individual emotion, it's a social emotion. I won't be talking about the results of that study today, unfortunately. I will try to make more kind of pick up where Hans-Uwe left us, actually. I will try to speak more about what it actually systematically means, the emergence of food bank in such a society as Germany, where we have a welfare state. We have a big tradition of a welfare state. But what does it mean that food banks come up, especially there? So let me start maybe with a pre-note. So my aim is to make a diagnosis of the current state of the welfare arrangement in Germany and try to make sense of a fairly recent development, the emergence of what we can call a charity economy. That's a term that I use now. Other people have used it, especially Fabian Kessel, who is now at Wuppertal University, was formerly also at Bielefeld. But I'm doing that not by analyzing the core of the welfare state, right? I'm coming from a phenomenon on the fringes of our society, yeah? And that has a bit of a danger. That means if we look from the fringes of society and try to analyze the core of the welfare state, that we might overestimate the transformation a little. That is a risk that I'm taking in that perspective. But I think it's fair enough to do so, because I'm saying that what we see at the fringes, what we see with poverty policies at the moment, has something to do with the core. And maybe that is also the link that links my talk up to Hans-Uwe's talk. And to just give you a little bit of background on poverty in Germany, when we talk about poverty in Germany, the current debate is a bit of a funny one, because there are quite a few narratives around. One strong narrative is that the German society, especially in Germany, this narrative, is in comparison to other European countries, is not only stable but prosperous. Within this argument, the unemployment figures are quite often used as a key benchmark to judge the state of the society. The argument is, despite the crisis within the banking world in 2008, the following crisis within the financial markets and the implications these had on a number of European states, think Greece, and the social fabric of these societies, Germany has seen a remarkable reduction in its unemployment rate. And if we look at the figures, this argument seems to have a point. The unemployment numbers within the official statistic went down, while the rate was around 10%, even higher, 11.7%, between 1995 and 2005. The statistics show now that the unemployed rate is in 2018 at 5.3%, the lowest rate since 1995. Remarkable. Within this argument, it is often pointed out that the reduction that we can see is the direct outcome of changes within social policy in 2003, 2005. And that there's an interesting link, because we had 3 governments in the US, in the UK, and in Germany that I would call Democrat, social Democrat, right? In the US, you know, we end welfare as we know it. In the UK, the third way policies and the Schröder-Blair paper all had kind of workfare policies there. And people claim that this is the outcome of that. And there might be a point to that even. But if we widen the focus a little bit and not only look at unemployment statistics, but look at poverty statistics at the same time. And we measure poverty in Germany relatively. So we set the median income and look at 60% of that, and this is the relative poverty figure. The poverty rate went exactly in the same time up. Yeah, we're now in 2015. This is the latest I could find. It's 16.8, and it went up from there. Yeah, at the same time, where we have a remarkable reduction of unemployment, we have an uprise in the poverty figures in relative poverty, and we have other studies who back that up. This is just income. We have other studies who look at it in a more multidimensional way and over time. And a colleague from Bremen did that, Olaf Grosamberg, and he points out that about 20%, in different ways, about 20% of the German population face some form of poverty, precarity status. So this is a society of 82 million. This is a lot. Yeah. This is just the background of what I'm going to talk about. Then, because I think food banks in Germany are 25 years old now. Yeah. This is the time in which food banks developed, and food banks are an international phenomenon. We know books by Graham Reiches from Canada. Even in Germany, we read Janet Poppendiek's Sweet Charity. We have European studies now that are a bit younger. The development there is a bit younger, but we have it all over the world in what we could call industrialized, post-industrial societies. But I think we have to be a bit skeptical in saying it's everywhere the same. Because I think the societies are quite different, and the welfare arrangement, and I would always put like state arrangement now, yeah, welfare state arrangement, then the state a bit in brackets, are quite different, and we have to ask each time, what does it mean that we have food banks here? And it might mean something completely else, that in the US we have food banks, and in Germany have food banks, because it means something else within the system. So what I'm trying to do now is try to make sense of what does it mean in Germany. And I'm trying to line out, first of all, what food banks actually mean, what food banks are in Germany. So how do they operate? That's the first bit I'm going to do. And then I'm trying to come up with 2 or 3 brief systematic analyses on how we can try to make sense of what's happening there. So the food bank approach is a bit different to what you guys may know or may not know about food banks in the US, and there might be also similarities. The pictures I use, they are this PR material from the food banks. So if you see loads of smiley people, if you see loads of really well-kept food, it might be sometimes, it might be also different. Yeah, but I took them still, and you can take them with a pinch of criticism and critique there. Yeah, but I didn't want to take my own photos because that would be weird. I took the ones that they already put out there. And food banks in Germany are charitable organizations, mainly run by volunteers, which distribute donated groceries to people in need. That's mainly kind of really setback definition. Yeah. And we've seen an enormous growth over the years. Take that parallel to the poverty statistic. I don't want to make like a direct comparison, but it's not too far-fetched. It's not too far-fetched, I would say. They are mostly small, locally organized organizations. That's important. They invented a federal organization way later. It's local, it's grassroots. It's mainly the big charity organizations like Caritas and Diakonie, which are linked up to the church, and they had volunteers on the ground, and they wanted to do something. And what they did is they basically asked supermarkets whether they could give them the food that they would throw away, whether they could collect them and then give it to people in need, whatever that means, right? We have about 1.5 million users of food banks who use it regularly. That's almost once a week, usually. That's a large number, and 60,000 volunteers. It is also, the last point here is normalization. It has really become a normality to have a food bank in your city, like a post office. In Germany, you don't have post office anymore. You more likely, because they're all, they're all gone somehow. But a food bank is kind of becomes a normal infrastructure. That's remarkable. Food bank users are people in need, and interestingly, need is needs to be defined locally. They have to make it up. There are no rules. There's no, law. There's no. They can follow, and they usually do that by linking it up to some form of official documentation. So most often they are also able to get some form of state benefits, and they have to show their certificates, and then they can get something. So there's an interesting link between a volunteer sector and state regulation without being the same. It's all volunteer, there's no state involved, no rights, and all of that. And in my studies, I found one thing really interesting. All of them said, when the question comes up, why we go there? I didn't ask these kind of questions. I asked them to tell me their biography. But at one point, they all say, like, oh, and there was a point. And that point was usually, it was a financial situation where they didn't know what to do anymore. They might have not gone before, but there was one point in their life where they just couldn't do it anymore. Yeah, and they kind of already knew that there might be a food bank, tried to avoid to use it. One actually said that she always had like a basket in the car, but drove past because she couldn't face to go in there, and all of that. Yeah, she didn't want to be seen in front of it. She didn't want to see herself in front of it. All of that. So emotions of shame, I already talked about that. Distributed products are leftover groceries. That is really important for the self-concept of the users as well. Some tell me like, oh yeah, this is the food where hundreds of people in the supermarket went past. This basket of strawberries where a few are already moldy. You and I wouldn't buy that one. Why should I pay? I don't know. I was in New York the other day, and now it's all weird. $5 or something for a few strawberries. I wouldn't buy that basket of strawberries if there are some moldy ones. So this goes to, in Germany, that would go to food banks and there's a cleaning process on that. But the people know that you and I went past it, and they have to eat from that. And there's an exchange of a symbolic amount, so maybe €1, maybe 1.50. That doesn't matter, and they get a basket. Here, by the way, you see this picture. The volunteers trying to sort out few things go into the bin, a few other things then are kind of cleaned and go into the distribution. But there's no possibility to plan to supply. So when you and I go to the supermarket, you probably either go shopping and kind of, you don't have pasta anymore, and you don't know if you want pasta tomorrow, but pasta is a stock at home, right? Or you have a set meal in mind and know, okay, tonight I'm going to cook this. This is not possible with food banks because it's all donated. And the food you see here is highly seasonal, right? And it goes off very, very quickly. And people have a lot of time, taking a lot of time to actually prepare a meal out of something that has a weird selection process. Because you don't necessarily need it, but you need to use it fast. And people view it really as a weird mixture. And some people say, it's like a Christmas present each time when I go to a food bank because I know I get something for free that I really might need. And others, or even the same, say that's food that no one wanted anymore. And there's this weird mixture in the emotions about it. So that is always present. It's not clear always one thing. It can be like a Christmas present and an insult to yourself at the same time. That's an interesting thing there. I already used this term very briefly. I think it makes sense to talk about food banks not as a singular kind of institution in our societies, but as a system. Yeah, food banks now are very popular in the media because you know that you can see poor people in a picture and then you can put it in the newspaper, and that has made them quite visible. But you have clothes shops, charity shops. You have it for furniture. You have it for all sorts of other things. And Fabian Kessel and others, I myself, try to kind of systemize it as a completely new system for, or new and old maybe, yeah, but in a new form, where elementary goods are donated and then distributed, and it's done by volunteers, and it's a form of alms giving. Yeah, but at the same time, and that's important, it is part of the capitalistic market economy. The supermarkets, they have an interest in multiple ways. They have an interest because they save waste disposal costs a big time. There's tons and tons of food that they don't need to destroy. They have big marketing effects because they are doing something good. And in some cases, not in all of them, they can also claim tax credits. Food banks are run like enterprises, so there's an economy effect in itself, and it's creating a secondary economy on its own for people who don't go to the first market anymore like you and I would, but to this secondary charity economy market. And research studies from colleagues of mine in Dortmund and now a research group at Wuppertal, they have done a really interesting job, and they can show that the charity economy is much bigger than the numbers I showed you with food banks, and the charity economy is through multiple ways kind of aligned or connected, yeah, loose connections, I would say, to welfare, to the welfare state. If you have a question about that, I can tell them, can say something about later. In my own study, for example, that is also reflected in the language of food bank users. In the interviews, they described that, like in job centers, they referred them to use a food bank, yeah, or social workers advised them to go there, yeah. So, but what does it mean? So, coming back to the original question, what does it mean for the configuration or the reconfiguration of the welfare state arrangement within Germany? The French sociologist Robert Castel argues that the modern European welfare arrangement tries to provide social security, especially for those who have nothing but the ability to sell their work in order to be able to secure their life into the tomorrow. Yeah? So the workers who have nothing but their work in order to survive tomorrow. And social security for those is provided through social rights, while social groups with high enough economic capital are more or less secure through their private property. The working class is vulnerable to dangers of life, illnesses, accident, unemployment. Social rights, Castel argues, that are provided by the welfare state functions like property, but not as private, but social property. In a bit of an idealization of the European model, Castel claims that thereby the welfare state creates not a society of equals, but a society of people who are similar. Here we are. That is, I think, an idea behind a modern welfare arrangement. I think we can formulate a critique whether that actually has been realized, but let's take that as a background. The reality of welfare capitalism maybe was always a bit different. Traditionally, the characteristic form of the German welfare arrangement is described as a mix between the provision of welfare by families, by the state, by civil society actors, and through the market. The principle of subsidiarity means that before the state intervenes, other resources have to be used. But it means also that the state assures that a certain standard is provided. The provision of welfare is not necessarily carried out by the state itself, but the state addresses itself as the entity that assures that a certain standard is guaranteed. The main institution that gives the traditional German welfare state its characteristic form is the insurance system, which is accompanied by a system of basic security benefits in Germany. The insurance system effectively protects the middle classes. Firstly, the middle classes need insurances because they don't have enough capital to be safe against standard risks of life. Secondly, they have something to insure. Yeah, they got something and are able to contribute toward the insurance system in a way that means that they would get, for example, a pension or relevant financial support in the case of unemployment. Those who don't have private resources and are not effectively protected by insurance because they aren't able to pay into the insurance system in a substantial way can claim a basic form of welfare benefits in case they are faced with certain hardships, so means tested. Yeah? In this way, the traditional German welfare system stabilizes the structure of the society, including the existing inequality, and at the same time provides a basic web of security to secure a minimum for those at the bottom of the society. That's a traditional idea. Yeah, that's of course the reason why Gösta Esping Andersen, in his three worlds of welfare capitalism, we cannot have a critique of that, but yeah, it characterizes the German case as a conservative welfare arrangement, yeah, because it stabilizes the inequality structure very well, with a safety net at the bottom. The distinction between the social insurance system and the means-tested benefit system has been criticized as a divide of workers' policies, or now even population policies, I would say, on one side, and poverty policies, or even poor people policies, on the other hand. But, and that's crucial, the fight against poverty was and still is part of the core self-description of the German welfare state. The self-description, it's still there. Within its self-description, this welfare state claims that it ensures not only social and cultural participation, but claims furthermore that it enables people to live their lives in dignity. That's an interesting claim that has constitutional status in Germany as a self-description. Yeah, we have to check whether the reality holds up to that. So assuming for a moment that this characterization is still accepted as more or less valid, I would like to argue that the rise and the establishment of a charity economy must be seen as a symbol for a shift within the welfare arrangement. A shift of responsibility regarding the interventions towards people in poverty from the state to civil society actors. The support is no longer provided on the basis of citizenship and individual rights, but out of a charitable act in the form of alms, and comes with a personal relationship of dependency. The support is not given by money, but by elementary goods of a special quality. We talked about the special quality of the goods already. They are not market products, but donations, surplus, or simply leftover goods. The provision of groceries by food banks cannot be guaranteed, which means that food bank users in Germany face unpredictability and insecurity regarding their supply of food. The use of food bank means the loss of the consumer role and the integration into a secondary supply system of elementary goods. Food banks provide a form of emergency support that has become permanent in most cases. The support at food banks is neither capable nor has the aim of preventing or tackling poverty. Their official claim is to soften the hardship within poverty. The acceptance of the existence of and the need for food banks can therefore be seen as the acceptance of poverty that does not need to be tackled. Food bank users find themselves in a situation where they are confronted with stigmatization, emotions of shame, and substantial attacks on their self-respect and self-esteem, which raises the question whether the security net is protecting really dignity for all people. So this was kind of my first going through like a classical analysis of what the German welfare state is or was, and trying to put the food banks against that. And now I'm kind of coming closer to Hans-Uwe and a new trend. Because when we look at the transformation of the welfare state, what we can see is most often a diagnosis that the German welfare state is facing changes towards a social investment and activation paradigm. And Hans-Uwe lined that out already. I can cut that really, really short. The installation of the social investment strategy is understood as a change regarding the reason and the aim for welfare interventions. The focus changes toward the outcome regarding future benefits for the society as a whole. Within such a perspective, certain social groups, like children, became an important target for social interventions regarding the promises they hold in the future. They come into perspective as investments into the future. The idea of activation entails that recipients of welfare benefits don't foremost need financial resources in order to secure a decent life while they are unemployed, but have to be activated and motivated in order to find work. So I would say these two paradigms are different paradigms, but they come together in a way. Yeah? And they may be used for different groups. Interestingly, food banks and similar institutions don't quite fit into this picture either. They are neither a form of social investment, nor do they aim to activate their users in a direct way. In fact, almost the opposite might be the case. They could be characterized as the other side of a welfare state that focuses on potential resources to activate and to invest in. In the view of the paradigm of social investment, the users of food banks are in most cases no longer of any interest as an investment for the future. Regarding the activation paradigm, it seems we have to distinguish two cases. Firstly, some of the food bank users might be recognized as people that can no longer be activated. So in the job centers, they not even bother anymore to offer them new jobs because they know the health issues are so serious that they cannot take up any offer they would make them. In other cases, it might be kind of the other side by providing an environment that is full of stigmatization and shame and that pushes people into jobs they otherwise wouldn't take. So it could be the dark side of an activation paradigm. The first case means that food banks and the charity economy as a whole functioned as a form of social support for those who are neither being recognized as being worth any form of investment nor capable of being activated. The second case suggests that the food banks have become an integral part of the activation paradigm itself. While food bank users might not be recognized as an object of investments, they are still within the focus of activation. The lack of financial resources which lead to problems within their way of life can be seen as a structural form to pressure people into the labor market. The stigmatization and the tax onto self-esteem that comes with this charity economy would therefore be a functional part of the new welfare state itself. I sum it up. We can see here a new divide between poverty policies and workers or population policies on the other side. Poverty policies that are granted by the state are more and more reduced, while charity organizations provide a new form of support aimed to help people in poverty, but doesn't tackle poverty anymore. It doesn't fight against poverty, kind of alleviates the consequences of poverty in a way. While the self-description of the German welfare state still states that it aims to fight poverty and provides the resources so that people can live their lives with dignity, we are faced with ambivalences and contradictions. These contradictions become visible within the food banks and the charity economy as a whole. Thank you.
Clarifying question, and then I'll invite Hans-Uwe, and we can ask him both questions. So clarifying questions.
Yeah, clarifying question. Okay. But first, just thanks so much, Hans-Uwe and Holger. I didn't see this in Hanover.
Huh.
I went to that other day, so I'm thrilled. Anyway, so I just want to go back to your charts in the very beginning about the poverty, the poverty rate up and the unemployment rate down. In this country that would be expectable because of the way we measure unemployment. Mm-hmm. It's very, very tight, and it misses a lot of people who now are what we call discouraged. Mm-hmm. How does it work in Germany? How is unemployment measured in Germany?
I think the answer could be it could be two things, right? Either it's a statistic, that the statistic just was reconfigured and there are more people out, or there are actually more people taking up a job. And I think the data shows that both is true. The changes within the Schröder administration meant that more people had to go to trainings. And if you're on a training, you're not counted as unemployed anymore because you're not available to take a job because you're fulfilling a training. So that makes the statistic go down. But we can also see that more people take up jobs. They take up poor paid jobs. We have, I think, what we can now call a new proletariat in Germany that is a service sector proletariat. Like people who bring the Amazon packets. Interestingly, social work, if we think about elderly care, there's a huge sector, poorly paid a sector that is always also part of that. So I think we can see both to make it short. I think some effects of social policy changes that kind of, I would say, mess with the statistics, but also people are kind of pushed into poorly paid jobs.
And so if you will come.
Yeah?
No, there'll be a question for both of you.
I was sitting there.
We don't have much time, and I know some people will have to
You see,
leave very soon.
with this last thing is a complicated thing. First of all, we have to debate in this whole discussion the minimum wages. Because what does it mean, minimum wages? It means the economy is growing, but the people are paying only a minimum. So they are pressed sometimes to go there, but in the measurement, they are employed. You see, so the quality, and you mentioned it in the second, that is the important thing. At least in the United States, sometimes we are enforced now to follow the politics of your president, and there I have seen that the unemployment rate is reducing. And all people are saying, oh, he's a hero. And they are, sometimes below the German figure as far as I remember. And also think, how can it be? Okay, we don't go too further in this. So it is a complicated thing, and how to measure unemployment. When you bring in them, you have to make clear the norms. Which does it mean unemployed? For instance, when I see here wanted at the shops, are the people who are working on that way, they are unemployed. But so I think more for me and also for Holger, I think the quality of the quality of employment, that is a question, at least for social work. The other is burning on the wrong side. That doesn't mean nothing. So.
Thank you for both of your talks. Very appreciative of what you provided to us. So forgive me for my ignorance when it comes to the ways in which poverty is demonstrated or proven within the German state, within the German welfare state. Here, when I was doing social work, in order to have people gain access to food banks, I would need to provide some sort of documentation that this person is indeed poor, or doesn't have a level of income that would allow them to provide for their needs in any other ways. How does that? I mean, I think you might have mentioned or alluded to it earlier. There's some sort of needs test or something to that effect. But is there some sort of formalized structure that exists when it comes to demonstrating that individuals indeed qualify for access to resources.
At food banks? Or,
yes.
Yeah. The food banks usually use welfare state certificates. Like if they're unemployed and they get means-tested benefits, they ask for that certificate, and as soon as they bring that, then that kind of allows them to use it. And there's similar other ways, but it's interesting that they have this kind of formalization process. There's a big debate in Germany within food banks. Why don't they give it to everyone? I mean, why do they specialize so much on this group? Why not for everyone? And there are obviously, you know, then the underclass debate comes in, and then it's claimed that there's a culture of poverty where people just take things and all of that, and we need to prevent that, and that's therefore we need to have means tested. And they usually do that through a standardization form like that.
For me, the question with the food banks, he is an expert, I'm a follower, but we have food enough. That is the beginning, because the food was thrown away. But it came from a critical point. Some opponent to our society setting up, they tried to make it illegal. It was forbidden. You couldn't take it. It was outside in the boxes, and we had then the date is over, the day to eat, but it doesn't matter. So it was an opposition. And then now it changed completely in this way. That is an interesting point. And when you see, and you mentioned it, the tons of food is unbelievable. Huh? So they should go anywhere. To Africa? No. Meat, yeah, but they had to pay for it. No? So to send it without nothing, it is not done as far. And we had milk enough, we had meat enough, we had chicken enough, we had all these things. Like in your country. Huh? If you see the TV spots around, I always try to eat. My mouth is going up and the wonderful pictures are there. Huh? So it is enough. So then the capitalist system is coming up in this mechanism. Huh?
I have a question for both of you just about, I mean, what is the historical memory of East Germany? How does that affect the way that people, relate to the stigma they feel around food banks, or also the shifts that they're seeing in society?
Empirically, we don't know about this topic. There's a few studies now starting, and I would say my PhD was kind of one of the first who looked at service users and kind of also looked at how changes in social policy are then going through towards the subject and subjectivity. We have a few studies now, but most studies in all different fields, and I use just the example of food banks. For me, food banks are an example, a symbol of a change, right? Most studies in Germany, as far as I would kind of oversee them, are programmatic analysis of what the changes are, and I think we are now starting to do research, empirical research, on what the consequences of these researches on these transformations in daily life are, and that would be an interesting question, whether the changes translate into different things in the different parts of Germany. I think for me there is now convincing evidence that the East-West divide becomes less prominent, and the divide between different classes or different capital. You know, if you're rich in the East, that has something else than when you are poor, and so on. I think that these differences become more and more bigger, but again, there's no clear empirical answer to that as far as I know.
There is a political question you raised, because at the beginning we tried to become a united Germany with all these things, because the currency was there, and then, okay, now this came, Pegida and all these oppositional groups coming up, because they told us we are the forgotten groups in certain ways. You have the same with your steel workers here around, with the, what is it called there? Here, Trump is always he has this following. So they are in some ways they are forgotten groups by social policy, and that's a power play why it is. But you are right on that way. It is not coming up for all questions. They are now coming up. What does it mean to be growing up in a Soviet directed, non-democratic part of Germany, and all the things that was the starting point. And then it came now to a social political agenda, because the tensions are a little bit different than rental. But that is, I don't know with the food banks, he should know that, and he said, I can't find a big difference.
I have a question that I guess speaks a little bit to both what Magna and Mr. Stain. I'm curious about whether or not access to welfare or food banks is contingent upon citizenship and participation in the welfare state, and how the conversation might be changing if then your participation is being tracked or reported to the state, your consumption of welfare goods, and if so, if the current immigration context or refugee setting is impacting the charity economy being an arm of the state, and then thinking about social work as a political project, then how that response might shift from one of service delivery to sort of protection of the rights of transnational folks who need food. So I guess there's a whole bunch of questions packaged in there, but like, yeah, how does this meet with citizenship and in the current context of immigration as well? I guess it's either.
You want to start?
Okay, the first answer about the political self-understanding of social worker. We have now the first research around that, and it is a weak. They are not really in this clear self-definition about their job in the political agenda. The second one is we have some reports about the students, and the students are now, at least in the few empirical studies, of the other side of a progressive position. They're coming back to the position and say, okay, when people have done something which is out of the norms, they have to be blamed, and so on and so on. So they are coming back to a for us forgotten normalization. So that means a traditional bounded or very harsh bounded. It's not the whole social work in Germany, because there are only a few studies, and we can ask ourselves why we have only a few studies about this very important thing. Then I can ask you, do you know about the political agenda of your students folk here around? No. So there maybe it has to be discussed also. Now just is the proper time, because all over politics is going a certain way, and now it is a kind of self-understanding to see what are the students here really thinking about. Because this is a starting point for really self-understanding. I'm really sure, otherwise you can't do that. And the other thing is with the recalibration, how we call it, about maybe beneficiaries or the subject and the state. So so which you can claim out of rights from the state. And the old welfare state was really on this situation. If something was needed, it was by law, if you can get something to compensate your own diseases or not. And it was really, we have this kind of laws. We have this kind of laws in Germany. This one, where how social work should do this and this and this and this, and behind the law is a guarantee of the state to do something against or in favor. But it's the reality is pressed in laws a good deal. And when social worker in Germany would look for a solution in a certain complicated thing, they don't grab the books which we are doing. they go to their bookshop for the book shelves, and took a comment, a legal comment out of it, how to do that in a proper way. So that is behind all these doings and thinking, there are complicated things which make you aware about your own position. That is the point. And when you can't find out the proper way for your own position, then you are weak, and you are following then the agenda of the state. And social work not following the agenda of the state, because then the subject, the poor or needed subjects, they are handled in the wrong way, because they don't come to their own personal their own personal situation.
Just to add a brief note, because I think you hit really the nail on the head. Even with Castell and the idealization of a welfare state, citizenship is at the core of that kind of idea. And I think in the realization of the German welfare arrangement, the state, in my understanding, is much bigger than the understanding in comparison to the US, and the idea of citizenship and the support provided through citizenship is bigger. And then, of course, and I think with this idealization of Castell, we would think that that is a good thing, because we can claim it against someone, and there's some kind of form in which the society addresses itself and what should be done, like within the welfare state, it addresses itself and tries to configure out relationships, how they should be, in the form of a citizen. But we now then get into trouble when we look at people who are not citizens. And that is, I think, an underdeveloped discussion in Germany, also because the phenomenon has not been as big as in the US. The question of illegal migrants, people without documents, and all of that has not been that big of an issue for the last 50 years, but is now. And is now in big times, and we're seeing it now, and all the problems that you could imagine are there. Yeah.
Last question from Irene. I appreciate your patience and staying over time, because usually we finish at 1:30, and I know that many people just stay because it's interesting. So,
yeah. It's just a question about, out of my curiosity, I thought is, what does it mean that we have put bank is really the central thing in your study. So it's really, what it means is depending on the political and cultural context.
Yeah.
Are you aware of other studies, similar study about the charity economy in other countries or other political, social contexts?
Yeah, there are a few colleagues, as I mentioned before, who worked on it, like Graham Reichers in Canada. He did a study, I think in the 80s, and I think it's a classical study. And Janet Poppendick here in the US, she was at Hunter in New York. And there are a few younger colleagues now in the UK who work on it. They don't necessarily use the word charity economy. That's a term that we kind of try to coin a little bit to see whether it sticks or not. We will see. But we try to make sense out of a phenomenon, and that's firstly a phenomenon, and then we try to give it a word for it and see whether we are criticized for it badly or not. So that's kind of what we're doing now. So there is some research there. One last thing I would kind of like to say, because you're going to close us up otherwise. I think what is interesting now, I think, between the two talks of Hans-Uwe and me, we didn't talk about before. I kind of knew what Hans-Uwe would do, but I didn't know exactly. And Hans-Uwe ended with the question of what does it mean for social work, for the profession, for kind of professional thinking. And interestingly, within this charity economy, there are also people who think about that. And they see this as the future. They think this is neighborhood giving, neighbors caring about others, and a pure form of charity and support. And there are even texts, intellectuals thinking about that this, at the end of welfare as we know it, that this is the new form. And I think Hans-Uwe's question, and you always end on this, is a political one. Is the profession strong enough to formulate normative values that criticizes it, without maybe demonizing it, yeah, but with criticizing it and bring something against it? I think that's kind of a point where we are now, and the food banks might be an example of what Hans-Uwe had in mind, how it could probably go wrong.
Give me 1 second.
1 second.
1 second. 1 second.
Go.
1 second. The welfare in Germany started more or less in the last, 1800 and so as a charity driven. Huh? Then it came up with welfare agencies by the Christian believers. Huh? And now the market is coming. You see, it was announced, and the state, the German state, is paying the whole thing. 98% of the activities of this kind of welfare agencies, when they are officially, are paid by state money. There's a big difference for the legalizing for some and for the laws, because when you go this way, you have to have contracts, and with the contracts, then the power question is in. And today, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we had this Caritas and Diaconie, and so they announce themselves with their belief system. Today, they don't do it. Today, they announce themselves, we help for elderly, for children, and then in a small line behold, Caritas or Diaconie. So you can see they're changing there. Is also here to bring in, and I don't wonder when sometimes, not in Bielefeld, but in another universities, social workers are trained to become working in the food banks, huh? Because you showed the way which is possible that it's an integrated part of the welfare state.
Yeah, I mean,
and then
BA theses I've written about how this could be part of it, right? Yeah.
Okay.
When Mark and I talked about it, we knew that this can go for hours. And it's wonderful chance to talk.
Yeah.
Those of you who want to stay behind and ask them questions, I don't know if they have plans now, but go ahead and talk to them. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.